We'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for being here. And today we've got our response component is meeting. Over the last 2 days, we've heard from our governance component, talking from some of our political subdivisions, the education sector, higher ed. Yesterday, we had our protection component, so we were able to hear from the epidemiologists, the physicians, and so today, as we look at the response component, we'll obviously talk about business, industry, tourism, small, medium, large businesses. We'll look at a number of different things. One thing I would ask everybody, and this is kind of, I like to always put this out there. Number one, everybody has a mask. If you're welcome to wear it, you've got it. You also have hand sanitizer. All the seats are 6 feet apart, so we're properly social distanced. Additionally, all the microphones and everything have been sanitized so that you can feel confident that they're safe to talk into. Because they control the microphones over there, and Helen and Jennifer will be directing a lot of our discussion, just kind of put a hand up if you don't mind so that they know to call on you. And I know it feels like we're back in Mrs. Dusing's third grade class, but that's just what we have to do right now. So I'll turn it over to the governor, and then I'll send it to Helen and Jennifer after the governor speaks.
Thank you very much. I'll go over here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Again, these meetings have been very informative, and I'd encourage everybody to participate freely. And remember, as I tell everyone in the military, the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. I ask stupid questions all the time, and sometimes they end up being not so stupid. But that's how you learn, because context is so important. Let me just briefly go through the context in which we are meeting, and that is this. Our state used a very smart, targeted, measured approach to restricting business. Unlike some other states that had a broader, untargeted, but broader approach, that's the way they did it, and we did it a little differently. We and I think three other states. So I just want to, as we have these discussions, remind everyone on what we did. And we did not attempt to draw the line between thousands of essential and non-essential businesses and classify them that way, because that is an impossible task. Others have done it. But what we did was we went at this from a different perspective, and that is a more targeted one of finding the hotspots. You recall recently the CDC mentioned 3 states, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, as hotspots for the contagion, and issued a domestic travel advisory on which we based one of our restrictions a few weeks ago. But they targeted hotspots. That's the same the way that we did this. So reading from one of these executive orders, I'd just like to remind you where the restrictions were that we imposed. Now, we asked everyone to observe social distancing to the extent that's possible, and we all know what that means. But as far as putting limitations on the businesses in South Carolina, here is what we did. We had a number of closures, and and we told people, if you're not on the list, you're not closed. If you're not restricted on the list, you're not restricted. And we had people calling up saying, well, am I essential or am I not essential? We said, well, look at the list. Here's the list. If you're not on it, you're not on it, and you can proceed, but do so with social distancing. So that is the context on which we are attempting to re-energize our businesses and industries, understanding that there are some, including our major manufacturers, that had to limit their work and in some cases closed down for short periods because they couldn't get supplies from the other countries or around the country, or because there was no market for what they were selling. So there are a lot of businesses and industries that have closed or limited or have been impacted one way or another, not because of what we have done or required in the state of South Carolina, but just in general conditions. So we're going to be fighting those general conditions of perhaps a lack of a market or a lack of supplies as we try to move out. It's not just what we do here that affects us, it's things that are happening in the rest of the country and the rest of the world. But if we are smart, we can have, as some have noticed from other parts of the country, South Carolina is doing it right. And it is a great place to be and a great place to work. But here are the ones that we put limitations on. Under the category of entertainment venues and facilities. And there are 4 different categories here. Now, we'd already issued the restrictions on the restaurants and the bars, as you know. That was, and the schools, which has continued. Entertainment venues and facilities as follows: nightclubs, bowling alleys, arcades, concert venues, theaters, auditoriums, and performing arts centers, tourist attractions, including museums, aquariums, and planetariums, racetracks, indoor children play areas with exceptions of licensed child care facilities, adult entertainment venues, bingo halls, and venues operated by social clubs. Those are in the category of entertainment venues and facilities, and that's the list. That's the exclusive list. Number 2 of 4, recreational and athletic facilities and activities as follows: fitness and exercise centers and commercial gyms, spas and public or commercial swimming pools, group exercise facilities to include yoga, bar, B-A-R-R-E, and spin studios or facilities, spectator sports, sports that involve interaction in close proximity to and within less than 6 feet of another person, activities that require the use of shared sporting apparatus and equipment, activities on commercial or public playground equipment. That's the second category, recreational and athletic facilities and activities. Number 3 of 4, close contact services providers as follows: barbershops, hair salons, waxing studios, threading salons, nail salons and spas, body art facilities and tattoo services, tanning salons. That is the end of the close contact service providers and follows. And of course, the reason for that category is quite obvious, because it involves very close personal contact and touching. And then retail stores as follows, and these were the small retail stores, not the big box stores, not Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's and those. They did suggest at one point that we apply a rule of 20% or 5 customers per 1,000 square feet, which we did, and we later applied that to these small retailers. The small retailers were required to close except for front door service for about 2 weeks. And here are the small retail stores. Retail stores as follows: furniture and home furnishing stores, clothing, shoe, and clothing accessory stores. If you've been in some of the shoe stores lately, they have 1,000 boxes of every size, it seems, on shelves all around, and people come in and touch them and put them on their feet and put them back in the box and put them back on the shelf, and it's just on and off all day long. And then you come in and do the same thing, and there you go, you're touching that same surface. It may have the virus on it, and this is a pesky virus. It doesn't go away. It's about like wet paint. Once it's on something, it's on there, and if you touch it, you go get it too. Furniture and home furnishing stores, clothing, shoe, clothing accessory stores, jewelry, luggage, and leather goods stores, department stores with the exception of hardware and home improvement stores. Why is that? Hardware stores usually don't pick something up and study it. You pick it up, put it in your basket or put it in your hand, take it and check it out. So there's not a lot of that back and forth that we see in some of the others. Sporting goods stores, book, craft, and music stores, flea markets, florist, and flower stores. We were happy to know that most florists do a heavy business when they do around Easter and other times. It's usually that people call up, make the order, and pick it up, and there really is not a lot of shopping inside the store. So those are the things that we put restrictions on. And of course, just last week or maybe 10 days ago, we applied the big box rule of 20% or so forth to those retail stores, the smaller retail stores that we had closed for about 2 weeks. So that is the context in which we are operating. So I think we went into this in a very smart way, a targeted way. It has worked. There's no doubt about that. And we want to go out in the same thoughtful, targeted way as we move out. There have been millions of dollars of loans, millions of dollars of unemployment money given to people. They are the Department of Employment Workforce and the SBA and the banks all doing record amounts of moving money into places where it's needed. So with that, I say thank you. And I would urge everyone to ask questions. This is a good time to get a lot of answers from people who have the answers. And we appreciate everyone on behalf of all the proud, happy 5 million South Carolinians. Thank you again for your work.
Thank you, Governor. And one thing that I think to segue in, and I want to briefly turn it over briefly to the Lieutenant Governor. One thing we heard yesterday, and I think that's important for this group and overlay to think about as we proceed through the day, is we heard from Dr. Bell yesterday tell us that economic health is a component of public health. And the important factor that plays in our public health. And so I think that's something we'll obviously discuss here today. Because again, it's about those things being balanced and being part of one another. So briefly, I'll turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor, and then Helen, it goes to you, correct? Okay.
Well, good afternoon, Governor and James, and to all of you. It's great to see you, even if we are socially distanced. The last 2 days have been incredibly informative. I think a lot of good collaboration came out of the prior sessions that we've had in these small groups. And I think a lot of South Carolinians are tuned in today, being this more of the business-focused center, because they are looking to see what our ideas are and how we are going to be stronger coming out of this, which is the whole goal of this group. So thank you all for your time, and thank you for what you're doing, as the governor would say, on behalf of the 5 million proud South Carolinians.
Are you ready for me?
Helen, it's all you.
Governor, thank you. Thank you for everything you've done with those protective strategies to help South Carolina. It's made the biggest difference. We've seen other states not do it nearly as well. And we thank you and the Lieutenant Governor for that. And I have to thank James. What a great comment. Economic health is a component of public health. And I think as we have our spirited discussion today, it is our job, this great committee's job, to really inspire hope that our economy not only will come back re-energized, but perhaps even better than before. So with that, I'm going to let Jennifer take over.
Great. Thanks, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Fletcher. I'm the Deputy Secretary at the South Carolina Department of Commerce. We've structured today's meeting a little bit different maybe than the previous 2 committee meetings, because I think knowing this group, we're all about solutions. And so what we thought we would do is we picked a couple of very, very pertinent and timely items, and we want to have some robust discussion about those items. And then when we get to the end, if we still have time, we'll absolutely go around the room and get additional topics from each of you. One thing I do have is I'm keeping a tally of all the different issues that were brought up in the previous 2 committee meetings as well as last Thursday. And so we'll keep those, and certainly we'll take any of those additional ideas that we want to discuss at future meetings. One of the interesting things we'll do this morning is, this afternoon is Ted Pitts with the South Carolina Chamber is going to show us some results, preliminary results of a survey, and I think that those results may guide today's discussions as well as future discussions. What I wanted to do is I'm going to give everyone a sense of who's in the room today, because we have our wonderful citizen and industry volunteers here, but we also have a really fantastic group of state agencies represented. So I'm just going to read down the list of folks who we have with us today that will hopefully help guide us and answer the questions. Sarah Hazard with the South Carolina Manufacturers Alliance is at the end of the table. You all met Helen Hill. She is the chair of the response group as well as the CEO of Explore Charleston. Next to her is Lou Kennedy, the CEO and owner of Nephron Pharmaceuticals. Chris Patterson with Summit Filtration from the upstate. I mentioned Ted Pitts earlier with the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce. Henry Swink with McCall Farms, right next to me. Greg Thompson across the way, Sumter Thompson Construction Group. Thanks for being here. Bobby Williams with Lizard's Thicket, right down the way, and John Warnachek with Zeus Industries. So those are our industry and citizen leaders that are here with us today. Additionally, we invited a few additional guests to join us as we know we're going to get into some more robust discussion and thought we could use their leadership. So John Dirch with the South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association is in our gallery, as well as Rebecca Leach with the South Carolina Retail Association, Susie Shannon with the Council on Competitiveness, and Joanne Turnquist with the Central Carolina Community Foundation representing our not-for-profit organizations. From state government, behind me, Beth Webb. I think everyone in this room knows Beth, but Beth is our wonderful liaison to the governor's office and also works very closely with PRT. Secretary Bobby Hitt joining us virtually from his porch on Lake Wateree. Ray Farmer, I saw earlier with our Department of Insurance, who's here as well. Frank Rainwater with Revenue and Fiscal Affairs. Hugh Weathers, Commissioner Weathers, our Department of Agriculture, is with us as well. Hartley Powell, Department of Revenue. Dwayne Parrish, who you'll hear from with our Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. Dan Elzey with Employment and Workforce. Thanks, Dan. Angel Malone with Department of Education. Saw her earlier. Myra Reese with DHEC is here, as well as Catherine Becker with South Carolina OSHA. So thank you all for joining us. Those are the folks joining us today. Look forward to a very robust discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ted.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm going to go through this quickly. Again, Jennifer said this is it's still in a preliminary stage. We're supposed to close to Thursday or tomorrow afternoon. Some folks have asked for us to leave it open, and we can sure talk about doing that. You know, the first thing I'll say is, you know, in coordination with the Department of Commerce and Beth and the governor's office, you know, we went and got feedback on what sort of questions they wanted to answer, and Government Master's office specifically said, I want to know how small business is doing. So here at the State Chamber, we have representation from small business, but we used our local chamber network across the state to make sure that small business had an opportunity to participate in the survey, and then we used our industry partners in the state, like Sarah at SCMA, Rebecca at the Retail Association, those strong partnerships with other state associations to make sure that the data that we got was as full and provided as much information as possible. So if you go to the first slide, and we'll give you a copy of this. We'll email a copy of this. They don't want things printed, so understand why we didn't print them. So the first thing it points to, that slide points to really what the governor wanted is what's small business saying. So about 60% of the respondents were businesses that have between 1 and 24 employees. So that is the small business, which makes up the vast majority of the business community in the state. And you can see the breakdown of the rest of the respondents. How long has your business been in operation? So if you look, over 50% have been in operation for over 15 years. So these aren't companies, startups that are trying to make it and couldn't afford to have a weak system introduced to them at a certain time. These are established businesses that have been in operation for more than 15 years, so over 15%. If you turn to the next slide, it just shows you, this is not an accurate sampling of what the state's business community is, but it shows you what the breakdown is of folks that responded. And I'll tell you the health care number, which I'm looking for, is 18%. You know, that we have health care institutions that are involved in the state chamber, but we've found out in talking to some of these folks that the people that are hurting the worst are the ones that said, I need to get my hands on that survey. So the group that is hurting the worst, I think, is they want their voices heard, and you'll see that in these responses. So go to the next slide, and you look at what the current challenges are, and really the top 3 are related to financial challenges. The demand, answer that there's not demand for my products or services, or the ability to cover payroll, or to make debt payments. Most of them are related to financial concerns. You know, the child care concern, if you've talked to many businesses, with schools being closed, the child care concern comes up more and more with folks saying, my employees want to come back to work, but they have a third grader at home that needs them at home. Their daycare's closed, the school's closed, they need to be at home. My parents are 80 years old. I'm not going to bring them into my house to have them watch my kids. So that concern continues to come up. If you go to the next slide, there are just some other responses. So testing, we've heard a lot about testing, and we do as well. And we'll get into this in a couple of the other slides. Businesses want to open back up. They want to bring people back in their place of business, employees back, but they want to do it safely. So they're the first people that say, I want to do it in a safe fashion. Testing is one of the things that we hear a lot about, and their employees want to feel safe. So that last response, employees afraid to come to work. So we have done, the national media, or just generally the information out there, has done a really good job of scaring people to stay into their house, right, to stay home. So how do we get them, when it's safe, how do we get them to feel like it's safe to come out of your house, to come out of their house and return to some sense of normalcy? So go to the next slide. So this is the furlough or layoff question, and Director Elsie knows this firsthand, but about half of the respondents said they had already furloughed or laid employees off. And you'll see that there's 45% roughly. And then about 55% said that they don't plan to, right? So their plans are changing, but they don't plan to at this time. Go to the next slide. What do you think you're going to do with those employees that you furloughed, right? So are you going to bring them all back? You know, that's about what 30% of them said. So I know Director Elsie's statistics say, what is about 70% of them are still attached to a job, which means they have a letter that says we plan to bring them back in 90 days. Well, I can tell you survey respondents say only about 30% of them say, yeah, I'm actually seriously planning on bringing 100% of them back. You know, as I talk to businesses and others, obviously, they'll tell you the plan changes every 2 days as they look at what's happening. So I think getting things started back is one of the key things that we'll take out of this survey. But you look at those numbers there. All right, next slide, Zach. So really this is just a question about how you've had to adjust, and about 30% have said they're completely unable to sell their services or products under a stay-at-home order. So about 30% of them say, we appreciate kind of where we are, but until we get back to some sense of normalcy, we really can't operate. You know, obviously the other piece of that is about 70% of them say, yeah, we've had to adjust, it's hurting, but we're making do for the time being. Next slide, Zach. So what are your business plans and strategies? And this is one of those that you can check all that apply. And only about 30% say nothing's changed significantly. But the rest of them all say in one shape or form they've changed. They've made changes already. They've readjusted their office space. I talked to folks that says full capacity used to be 10 people in this space. Now it's 5 people in this space, or less than that. They have obviously hand washing and sanitizing stations, disinfectant stations around the office. So everybody is making adjustments with COVID-19, and I think we can feel certain that employers' focus is to keep their employees and their customers safe. All right, next slide. Just touches on some other things. Again, cash and financial piece of this continues to come up as central piece. All right, go to the next slide, Zach. The next slide after that. Okay. All right, so if you look at what do you need to restart or bring your employees back to work full time, and 50.88% of them say, I need all orders lifted. I need stay-at-home orders lifted, Governor, and I know you're looking at doing that as quickly and safely as we can, but about half of them say, I need all orders lifted and return back to some sense of normalcy. The thing we hear the most when we drill down and talk to businesses is guidance. They want guidance from leadership, health leadership, government leadership that says, here's how you safely operate. Here's the things you need to do. Here's what needs to happen for you to safely operate. And then, about 40% of them talk about PPE. They're ready to implement strong PPE measures for their employees and even their customers in some case. they want guidance, they don't want mandates. So it's one thing I've heard loud and clear is in other states where governors have been far more aggressive in shutting business down and putting mandates on business, a one size does not fit all. They don't want mandates. They want clear guidance that's based on the health and safety of employees and customers. All right, next slide. So what's the biggest challenge if we're going to restart your business? What's the biggest challenge? And obviously cash flow comes out and guidance both come out at the top, and then obviously demand, which is also tied to financial. And then go to the next slide, Zach. So when you ramp back up your businesses, what changes do you anticipate making or continuing to make over the next 6 to 12 months? And this really just points to what the new normal is. It's a heightened awareness. It's safety. It's social distancing. Businesses are ready to take the lead on that front. They want guidance, and they're ready to take the lead on that front to be able to safely operate. And then next slide. So this is the issue. Sarah Hazard and I have been talking about this. Rebecca's in a group that's working on it, healthcare providers. Liability issues. I think if you really drill down and you talk to leadership about what is it going to take you to bring folks back in and to be able to fully operate, their liability concerns, whether it's their employees that don't feel safe or whether it's customers, worried about, I don't know where that customer actually contracted COVID, but they're at some point going to come back and say they got it in my grocery store, for example. We need liability protection, and we've talked. Sarah and Rebecca and the Hospital Association, the Medical Association are talking about proposals that we can bring to Senator Malloy and Senator Davis and the members of the General Assembly and ask for them to take up. Because if we want the economy to get back on track, people have to feel safe from a health perspective. But business owners also have to feel safe that they're not going to get hit with a bunch of frivolous lawsuits. So they want that guidance so they can safely operate, but the liability concern is one of those things that we're going to need for policymakers to take the lead on. And then if you look at the next slide, Zach, about 65% of the respondents to this survey applied for federal assistance, primarily the Paycheck Protection Plan, some of them the disaster loan system through the SBA. But about 65% applied for that financial assistance because cash flow and finances are their biggest issue. And then the last slide is about half of businesses say the new normal has them doing things different. They're going to have to diversify their business. So if you're a restaurant, how long does it take to have that restaurant full of people sitting down and eating your restaurant? You're going to have to figure out ways to sell to more pickup, more delivery. If you're a manufacturer, supply chains are what they are. Have things changed there that you need to actually try to reshore part of your supply chain that you may be getting from some other place. So about half businesses say that the new normal requires them to do things differently to be able to be successful. And that's a quick summary, Jennifer. We can share this with you, but we should have a final roll-up that obviously we'll email to everybody on the committee so that they have it. And we hope this provides some information so we can direct some of our conversations today in places that can be most beneficial.
Absolutely, Ted, and thank you so much for that. The survey is still live, yes. Where can folks find that?
So if you go to the Chamber website, there's a link there that will have you take the survey right there on the main page.
So anyone listening who owns, operates a business, not-for-profit organization that has been impacted, please go to the Chamber's website and complete the survey. And then Governor, Lieutenant Governor, I think our plan is to also present this at the next larger task force meeting and share some of these insights. And hopefully by then we might have 6,000 respondents with the platform of this to get the word out. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. I think there's a microphone, if you don't mind stepping to that. Thank you, Joanne.
Good afternoon, Governor, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you so much for having the nonprofit sector represented today. Mr. Pitts, we talked briefly when we saw one another this afternoon. There are 90,000 employees in the nonprofit sector, over 4,000 different organizations that are registered. And the initial reach for the survey completion did not really filter into our sector. We would respectfully ask for a continuation of that of a few days so that we can galvanize the troops so that their voices are represented, because they fit so many of those attributes that you had indicated up there with the same concerns and the same issues and the same employees.
Yeah, we're happy to do that.
That would be fabulous. If you can, we can talk afterwards, and then I can get that out. Thank you.
Already solving problems here this afternoon. Before I move on the agenda, while Ted recognized them, I want to recognize more formally, we've got Senator Tom Davis here and Senator Gerald Malloy. Thank you all so much for all your work in the legislature, and then for all of your time. I know both of you have attended several of these meetings, and we look forward to any concerns and input that you might have for us today. So I want to move on to the meat of our discussions today. I mentioned in the opening that we were structuring the agenda a little bit different so that we could really get into some of the issues, and the governor really set us up well in talking about those businesses that still have restrictions on them and what sorts of solutions and ideas can this group provide so that we can get those businesses back open, and we can recommend to the governor when might that occur, when do we think that would be safe and practical. So we are going to get to those discussions today, and you saw on the agenda that we had up there that that's our next item on the agenda. We're going to kick that off with Dwayne Parrish in just a second, using an example from the restaurant industry of how we might offer guidance and how we might discuss what is a safe reopening. I mentioned earlier also that we have a list of issues and ideas that I'm putting in what I call a parking lot. So legal liability is absolutely one of those things that I think we as a group need to discuss. But it's probably not today because of what we want to discuss today. And so you can see we're going to discuss safety protocols and reopening guidelines. We'll probably hit several industry or business groups that are important to all of you. All of you probably have had constituents that have come to you and asked you about those. From there, we're going to talk about access to personal protective equipment. I think it's come up in every meeting of AccelerateSC, and so our voice is another voice that will also underscore access to PPE. But being part of the business world who makes PPE, maybe there are some other solutions that this group can talk about to try and solve that problem. From there, we've got a number of topics under workforce, but child care being a critical one. Ted mentioned that as a concern, obviously with schools being closed, daycares not fully open, camps being in question. Parents are struggling with that, going back to work versus taking care of their children. Recall resistance and persistent unemployment. What happens when companies do start going back to work and they get resistance either out of fear or because of the $600 federal stipend that Director Elsie talked about last week? You know, what should we be doing there? And then what sort of opportunities should we be looking at for people who don't have a job to go back to that they could do safely and at home? So with that, those are our topics for today. I do want to turn it over to Director Parrish to talk a little bit about the restaurant industry and what sort of guidelines could look like for different groups as we consider reopening.
May I make a point about context
Absolutely.
before we hear from Director Parrish? That is in our home or work order. That again was, we were the last one in the Southeast to issue such an order, and ours was different again from all the rest. Ours said go to work or go home, stay home unless you're at work, unless you wanted to go to church or recreation or the doctor or something that was necessary to you. And what is necessary to you depends on you. And we made the point that all of those businesses and activities, unless they were closed or restricted, they were open to you. So all of those restaurants, excuse me, not restaurants, because restaurants were closed, Bobby. I see you over there. Look forward to hearing from you. Except for takeout, of course. And by the way, we worked with Bobby and Mr. Durst in trying to fashion what we thought was reasonable, and look forward to hearing from that. But ours was a little different because we only closed or limited those close contact in those crowded venues that I mentioned a few minutes ago. The rest of them were open. And if you were at home or you at work or you thought it necessary to go to any of those, you're free to do so. And that's how we have been different from the other states. And we think that it's worked. The president and vice president said so, and so has that University of Washington institute that is rating things all around the country said it has worked very well. And we think it has. So that's my point on context.
Thank you, Governor. Dwayne?
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Governor. So a couple of weeks ago, I sort of saw what was going on, and okay, light is going to come at the end of this tunnel before long. And one of the things I thought was really important for the restaurant side was certainly signify a lot of opening as we go forward, a lot of or what I would call confidence in our economy, particularly from the consumer. I mentioned last week about how a lot of what we need to do is install confidence in people to be able to, a patron to go back into a restaurant, a guest to go back into a hotel and feel safe about it. Because we don't want them to come in and not feel safe or something go wrong, because then we take a step back. So, and I want to thank both John Durst and Bobby Williams from the South Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association, as well as Myra Reese here from DHEC. So in talking to John, I thought, John, your restaurants are in the best position to be able to sort of decide from an industry input standpoint what can restaurants do to instill that? Because nobody wants the consumer to feel more confident than the ownership of the business themselves. And so I said, come up with this plan. Let's have DHEC involved with it, where Myra Reese came in, and then they had the University of South Carolina's hospitality program involved as well, and came up with a plan of what that new dining room looks like, if you will. Along those same lines, the South Carolina Restaurant and Lodging Association, they're presently working on a plan on the hotel side. What does the hotel swimming pool look like? How many chairs are around the pool? How many people are allowed in the fitness center at one time? All of those things sort of going forward, what do they look like? So last Friday they have come up with a plan. I'm going to turn it over here to Bobby Williams in just a second to talk about that. But I think it's imperative as we go forward. We have 485 hotels closed as of yesterday, which is roughly 40% of our standard hotel inventory across the state. About half of those, or a little more than that, closed of their own volition. The other half are in the Grand Strand in Myrtle Beach specifically, where they're closed. However, they will be allowed to open coming this Friday along with the beaches in Myrtle Beach. So that gives an opportunity for a lot of hotels to open up and say, okay, now what do we do? What do we look like? Again, it's wanting to install that consumer confidence. So John and his group are working on a plan for the hotel side now. That's sort of the next phase in this. But we thought restaurants was an important first phase, and so that's sort of where we are. But as we sort of go this process, I've cautioned the industry as a whole, it truly is a crawl, walk, run process. This is done in stage parts, and Bobby will talk about that on the restaurant side. But we believe that's sort of the way we go forward, Governor, and how things will go from here. Bobby, with that, I'll sort of turn it over to you. I think you've got copies at everybody's desk. I'll
Yes.
turn it over to you to talk a little bit about the plan and what your organization has come up with.
Dwayne, it's my pleasure to present the recommendations for reopening of restaurants and bars. The guidelines have been compiled by the South Carolina Restaurant Lodging Association Hospitality Industry Resilience Task Force. It was established about 6 weeks ago, and is composed of 19 leaders of our industry from both public and private sectors. A list of the committee's members can be found in your plan that's been given to you. The plan has three major guidelines: safety, gradual opening, and phasing in. We who are sitting on the task force believe that a balanced and strategic approach using best practices such as these is the optimal approach for our state, for our employees, and for our customers. In that spirit, after extensive collaboration and research, we suggest that opening restaurants' outdoor dining areas on May 4th being treated as takeout and delivery from regulation standpoint. I would like the outdoor dining be an extension of carry-out or delivery services. One other concern that we have is that we need to address the supply chain. The supply chain has not been able to catch up with the demand, not only for our large suppliers, but local farmers. For the last 15 years, restaurant community has really gone from farm to table. And these chefs are so proud of these farmers. They're celebrity farmers now that, I mean, they really love, they treat these vegetables and protein with respect. And so, unfortunately, the produce is dying in the fields. So we have got to get these restaurants opened to get the supply chain going again. Not only that, we have to get sanitation supplies, PPEs, digital thermometers to monitor the health care of our employees. We need time between outdoor dining and reopening dining rooms to rehire, retrain, and restock. We all want to reopen, but not sacrificing the health of our employees or guests. If all goes well, we could open indoor dining with selective seating by the week of May 18th. These dates could be changed as conditions warrant, but as of this time, these are suggested dates to gradually begin offering the awesome cuisine and incredible dining experiences to our guests. The safety measures that ought to be followed and detailed in the plan are to be relaxed as we move from the initial opening phase to other phases. We also recommend a strong continuing commitment to following the protocols established by Governor McMaster regarding safe social distancing and heightened awareness of public safety. Some examples of our highlights of our plan are continued employee safety training and compliance with DHEC, create a plan and checklist of services the customers will come in contact with and keep them sanitized, have hand sanitizer readily available for customers, selective seating, space tables at 6 feet apart and reduce seating, remove bar stools or maintain a 6-foot distance between guests. Each employee be given a temperature test before beginning their shift and wear gloves. We also recommend that employees wear masks in phase 1. If possible, use plexiglass barriers where needed in restaurants. Again, these are a few examples of the safeguards we recommend to be in place. These following guidelines will not only maximize safety, but also help in welcoming our customers back. Also in your packet, there is information from the South Carolina Golf Council. In the tourism industry, they are a big part of our industry. Golf is a very strong economic engine in our state, generating $2.6 billion in output or sales and creating over 30,000 jobs. We greatly appreciate their input on self-imposed safety guidelines, which also will be relaxed in phases as appropriate. So on behalf of the bag boys at the golf courses, the truck drivers who keep us stocked, the restaurant staff, and all others in our state's hospitality industry, we can't wait to say, we're glad you're here. Thank you very much, and do you have any questions? I'll be happy to answer them.
Dwayne, I'd like to ask a few questions.
Sure.
Bobby, either you can handle it or Bobby handles it. I know one thing that what we've heard about is and talking about is with respect to various people touching the same items, as if I came to this cup and touched it, and then the lieutenant governor comes and grabs it. So what are you proposing for, say, menus, salt and pepper shakers, condiments, things like that? What's your thought process on something like that?
Well, all condiments, no condiments will be on the table. And if a customer would like salt and pepper or ketchup or whatnot, we would either bring it to the table and then remove it and wipe it down, or use PCs, which are, small plastic cups of ketchup, individual, like you do on a carry-out. Menus, we would go to paper menus, or if in fine dining, they would have to sanitize each menu after each customer, but they're encouraging a lot of people to pull up the menu on their phone, and so they can order off their phone. So that's another way that the industry has changed to adapt, the new normal.
Okay. And I'd like to maybe if Commissioner Weathers, maybe from a food safety perspective, if you have some thoughts that you'd like to share on that topic.
Thank you, James. Yeah, we've been working with the wholesalers and the distributors about the same issues and the need for a lead time, like Bobby and I have discussed. But the Department of Agriculture, which provides third-party inspections, we've had that stood up the whole time on an as-needed basis. So that part is ready to go as soon as we are back in business.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take up all the time for anybody's questions, but I'll just keep after it because I want to make sure we properly ferret out this topic. From the DHEC perspective, and I see that Myra Reese is here, who is obviously a very respected voice at DHEC. From your perspective, Myra, and y'all kind of testing this and looking at the what the proposal, what's been laid out, and y'all being part of it, there's a strong degree of comfort in this phased-in kind of measured approach that we're taking. That's something that and with these new best practices and safety protocols that we're doing taking the right steps to move in the right direction.
I'll make a few comments, and I just want to say we have great leadership in South Carolina in so many different ways, starting with the governor and our restaurant sector, our associations, and a lot of thought has already gone into what those best practices would look like. And I really, going back, hearing the comments so far, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, that I think for us to be able to get the economy and our businesses back to where they need to be, we all need to be doing our part individually and collectively, and not really put the burden only on the shoulders of our businesses. And a lot of this goes back to just following the CDC guidances. And in following those CDC guidances, you're going to identify some best practices. And those best practices are going to provide that confidence that the employees need to go back to work and also for the consumers to go. And I can give you a personal example of mine with grocery stores. When some of the guidance started coming out with grocery stores, certain grocery stores in North Augusta were following the guidance, certain ones were not. I felt more comfortable going to the grocery store. That really made me feel safe when I went in there. Before you knew it, it must have been just a few days, every grocery store in North Augusta was doing the same thing. So I think the businesses just sharing, identifying those best practices. And I think we need to kind of change our messages a little bit when we talk about individual responsibility, is that you need to treat your restaurants and your grocery stores like your own kitchens and your own home. Not only are we looking for restaurant owners to be able to protect the consumers and their workforce so they can stay open, but people that go out, follow these guidelines, protect these businesses like they're part of their home and part of their house and things like that. So I want to say, I think I've been very impressed with the plans that have already been put together. And I think this is a golden opportunity. Restaurants, just like every other business, is having to create a new business model. And I think this is an opportunity. There are going to be some changes that a lot of our sectors are going to say, hey, this is working out pretty good for me. I want to keep this going from here on out. So,
I would like to suggest that what we're doing at Nephron is we've taken our clean room practices into our common areas, and one of the best things that I purchased last year, really just to do a due diligence study, was a portable machine to do vaporized hydrogen peroxide. So what I would say to you is it achieves kill. The person applying needs to wear a respirator because they're closest to the peroxide, but it's literally you can apply it and use the area almost immediately. Seems to me that would be a great thing for restaurants to own, or at least someone to provide that service to, let's take the Vista area. Maybe you could say we're coming door to door to the Vista area and do that a couple of times during the day. But that vaporized hydrogen peroxide, the machine that we use is made by Steris, but there are other companies out there, and you just need to make sure to look at the level of peroxide and make sure that they can guarantee you that it achieves kill of those germs. So that might be a suggestion for some.
Yeah, James, I just want to add one thing on top of what Bobby said, and this applies to hotels as well as restaurants. Those that have a chain affiliation, the national chain, I don't know if you saw in the news recently, Marriott has signed a deal with Lysol. They're going to have national standards for hotels and restaurants. I've seen the Marriott plan. It's 30-something pages. So I think that's sort of an indication of what the private sector really wants to be viewed as certainly safe and to build that consumer confidence that I talked about as well. So I just want to point that out in terms of restaurants and hotels, that there's, well, even on top of what we have here, there's other things in place too.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Williams, on the outdoor dining, you mentioned the date of May the 4th. Is that, what is particular about that date? Does that require some lead time for you to set up, or what went into that?
Honestly, none of my restaurants are able to do that, but there are restaurants that are already doing carry-out and delivery, and they'll have a few tables outside. That would just help them bring some employees in, start doing some training, some wait staff, because all the wait staff, unfortunately, is not working right now. So we would be able to bring it in slowly, gradual, and hopefully increase our business and increase the food supply, the chain, and slowly. And training is going to be the key for all of us. We have got to really train when we get back open, because it's going to be a new world out there. And you know, our customers trusted us before; they'll trust us again. We'll do the right thing.
Sure. I'm also wondering on the outdoor dining, how many restaurants are equipped or set up already for outdoor dining? And,
well, you know,
in having outdoor dining, what sort of spacing would be required there?
Well, it would be at least 6 foot spacing on tables, just like it would be inside the restaurant. But you know, they're not too far from here. There's a McDonald's that has got 4 tables about 20 feet apart outside, and they're not letting people sit out there right now, which I think, you know what I mean? I just think it's a little bit ridiculous that they can go to a park. You can buy the food and go to a park and eat it. It's no problem, but you can't go to one of their tables. So a lot of fast food restaurants have outdoor dining, a lot of fine dining in Charleston. Yeah. And let me tell you, people in South Carolina love to sit outside and eat. They absolutely love it.
Especially in this really nice weather we're having.
That's right.
Governor, I'll tell you, that we've got some beautiful, beautiful outdoor spaces. And even in Charleston, for example, we create some outdoor spaces at certain times. So I think this would be a great first step, as Bobby said. I think back to Dwayne's crawl, run, walk, it would really give us as an industry the opportunity to get going in a safe way.
Did you mention any sort of capacity inside other than spacing? Would that cut down on the number of tables? I presume it would.
Well, if you space at every other table or 6 feet, I did not put a percentage in there. I think, don't we have a percentage, John, in our paper, 25%? To be able to use 25% of the restaurant seating. Square footage.
Square footage, yeah. Square footage, Governor.
Okay.
When this first happened, we went to selective seating or every other table. And it seemed to work pretty well, and the customers were comfortable with it.
You mentioned going inside on the 18th, which would be 2 weeks from the 4th, which would be the outside. Is there anything special about that date? Why not the 11th? Why not the 10th is Mother's Day? That seems to be a good day for something happen. Everybody ought to take their mama, their wife, or somebody out to dinner or brunch or something on that.
It seems wonderful to me, too, but
I'm getting amens over here from you.
Governor, I think for us, it's letting the restaurants make that call based on the availability, because as Bobby said, the supply chain has got to work, right? So I think it's allowing them to each make their individual decision for their restaurant.
And I presume the more time advance notice you get, the easier it would be to accommodate your services.
We have to have at least 10 days, I would say.
Okay. Well, I think my final question for the moment is, what do you do? How will you police your customers if you have somebody that doesn't want to cooperate? How do you police that?
I really hadn't thought about that, but you know, I've been going to some of these big box stores around town, and we're policing ourselves. The public has been trained already about social distancing. I'm just amazed about what a great job they're doing. So we're going to have to police ourselves, but if there's someone, I hate to say this, coughing in the restaurant, it's going to have to be addressed, you know. And we will have someone in the dining room at all time making sure that people are separated.
That's one thing we've noticed in this whole episode is that we didn't know what social distancing was when it began. We didn't really, all the epidemiologists among us knew what contact tracing was, but we all know that now. So there are a lot of things that we've learned that can be tools to fighting the virus, the contagion that we really didn't understand before. That I think probably everybody in South Carolina understands it very well now, which will make it a lot easier to go out than it did to come in. That's all the questions I have for the moment, but thank you very much for that.
Hey, Bobby?
Yes.
I've got a question. From an industry association standpoint, have you given any thought to how you, I mean, guidelines are one thing, but how do you make sure that people are staying within those guidelines? I mean, are you going to self-police from an industry standpoint?
Well, we will have to self-police. I know with DHEC, we're doing virtual inspections right now, and I don't want to make this a love fest, but I have been in this business for over 40 years. Our DHEC today is our partner. For so many years, it was us against DHEC, and now they're our partner in business. They listen to our questions, and so it's been really great working with them because the complete attitude has changed. But it will be self-policing, and I think with social media that the customer is going to, if there's something wrong, they're going to let you know it right away. So, unfortunately, with social media,
that would be a progressive way for the state.
Can't hear you, sir.
I think the state would look more progressive if it invited social media feedback. In that, as was mentioned with the grocery stores, you soon ferret out what grocery store you feel more comfortable in, who's doing the better job of living by the code that was posted on the front door. So if we both police from an industry association, whether it be restaurants or hotels or any other industry, and also look for feedback as far as whether those best practices make people feel more comfortable. And of course, the natural inclination will be for businesses to thrive if they're attracting customers and they're doing a better job. So in a way, economics plays a role in it too, but I think all effort should, because the last thing you want is for something to go sour and end up with infections or outbreaks that are caused by, the revamped plan to start loosening up the restrictions. So,
if anything, the restaurateurs are the most adaptable people in business. They will go overboard to make sure it's right. There's no doubt about it. Just follow Chick-fil-A. I mean, Chick-fil-A, when this thing hit, they're ready the next day. And so we follow their lead, and we want to be as good as Chick-fil-A. And so customers trust us, we'll do the right thing.
And Bobby, I think one of the issues you mentioned are the best practices, right? I mean, y'all, the industry determines what those best practices are, and following those best practices. Greg, I know you had a
couple
question.
points. Governor, glad to be here. Lieutenant Governor, thank you. Besides being in the construction business, I do own a couple of restaurants and a brewery that have been impacted. 2 points, one to Mother's Day. I know in Sumter, the CEO of our hospital said after Easter, we saw a spike. And I think we saw the same spike in the state right after Easter, 7 days after Easter. So while I would love to see them open earlier, it may be prudent to let Mother's Day pass, because in the guidelines of the Restaurant Association, tables of 6 is the max, and it could be a challenge trying to manage large families trying to come out, because no mother wants to cook on Mother's Day, I know that. But that could be a point to consider, Governor. And then secondly, I know my wife is planning to put signs up in the restaurant to really help manage the clientele around following the guidelines and really posting the guidelines that the patrons should know that we're doing what's in their best interest, whether they think it is or not. Thank you.
Also, we're not proposing Mother's Day. It's the busiest day of the year in restaurants, and it's going to be social distancing. I think it could get out of hand. So we thought it would be best if my mother, if she was living today, she'd be 92. I would not, in today's atmosphere, I would not take her into a restaurant. So
I'm going to a point of personal privilege really quick, and then I'll turn it back over to Helen. Whenever everybody's speaking, I know you'll often turn to talk to somebody, but it pulls your mouth away from the microphone. And so in order for folks viewing it on ETV, and then for the benefit of people in a group, if you could talk into the mic. Again, they've all been sanitized. I mean, so we're all good. Myra, we're good. But anyway, and I'll turn it over to you, back to you.
Before we leave this, Governor, I'd love for Dwayne, will you just mention all of the great things that are happening with the parks, both the state, county, and city parks?
Sure. Our 47 state parks will reopen this Friday to day use visitors, people we know. There's a lot of cabin fever out there right now. We're excited about it. Our park rangers miss being around their visitors. We hope the weather's like it is today, and along those same lines, the South Carolina Recreation and Parks Association, which is the membership organization of most county and municipal parks, has recommended opening the first week of May at some point as well, which makes it even better for, local parks, state parks, and the like. We are taking reservations now starting May 11th, which gives us about a 10-day cushion to sort of prepare for those overnight folks. But we're excited about that. We have 47 of the most wonderful places in the state to see, and people haven't been able to go to them unless they went virtually the last month or so. And so we're excited about opening up this Friday. Thank you, Helen.
It's going to be great. And Governor, we're also working really diligently to look at those sporting events that are recreation-based and how we'll handle that. Now, Jim's Association's worked really diligently that, so we'll hope to come back with recommendations for you for those two.
Real quick, just so and I just want to make sure I can come full circle on this and understand it. Again, I think, as you said, Bobby, one of the things that y'all are seeking to do is to, again, employ best practices in the safety protocols, and then for a restaurant owner who can make that decision on how they are able to employ those and how they're able to employ the indoor seating and those kind of things to ensure people are safe and that the customer's safe, the employee's safe, that those folks who own those restaurants are best positioned, I think, to understand what works for their restaurant. And it may be a little bit different for yours versus this one. Greg may do something differently than what you do. And so, but again, you're employing all those best practices and safety protocols that help to ensure people are safe. So I just wanted to make sure I understood that. And I believe that's what you're saying, as I understand it.
We were employing those practices before we got closed before this. I mean, sanitation is a big part of the restaurant industry, and it's really important. But we were all doing the right things before, and we will do them afterwards.
Jennifer?
Yep. So I think using the restaurant, what you all did for the restaurant as a guide for best practices, and I think coming out of the South Carolina's Chamber survey where our businesses are really looking for guidance. One of the things we wanted to discuss in this section is, what sorts of guidance could this group put together in terms of best practices? I know DHEC and OSHA have done a great job of getting the updated CDC guidelines out there, but they don't apply to specific examples. So if you're a not-for-profit trying to get people to adopt pets, how do the CDC guidelines apply to you specifically, like they've done with restaurants? So I think this is a time that maybe we talk about what should we be looking at doing, creating a list of these guidelines, and should we have a central repository to where businesses of any size can access them? Dwayne talked about Marriott. We're not worried about the Marriotts of the world, but we are worried about the bed and breakfast, who is run by a sweet little couple, and they want to see, how do I interpret these guidelines for me, and what are the best practices? So I would put that out there and open that up for discussion. And if we have specific industry sectors that are of interest to the governor, lieutenant governor, I'd throw those out to the group as well.
So I think, and I think the information piece is one that we've heard. I think the governor and lieutenant governor, we've heard that for 3 days now, about, hey, how can we best disseminate information? I know yesterday one of the things we learned was that in our minority communities that the faith leaders are critical nodes of information for some of our minority communities, and how can we best disseminate information through them. I think as we look at like maybe some industry things and something we've heard talked about. So, and I think Katie Baker's here, right, from South Carolina OSHA, but like for instance our barber shops, our hair salons, some of these, what we would call close or contact type services, because again, service industries are such a critical.
James, I'm all for the hair salons coming back. I'm just have to put that out there, Governor.
So, Katie, do you think you could touch on some of those for us? And then, Myra, if you've got some thoughts about that too, I certainly think that'd be beneficial for the group.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's actually Christina. Christina Baker's, no problem. Just want to make sure for purposes of the record. As you mentioned, and it's been, I think lots of the businesses here know, we've provided general guidelines, right? The assessment of your own individual workplace. And we are working on slides and additional guidance that will further help, our smaller businesses. As you mentioned, we're not concerned about those who have safety directors on staff. We're really looking at those folks who have smaller businesses, don't have access, particularly now in this climate that they've had to downsize, access to that additional safety information. What we are also doing in addition to those general guidelines is we are working specifically in certain industries to have more specific guidance for those types of industries. You've mentioned Cosmo and Barbara as well. Once again, that is something that OSHA is working on, but we are leaning heavily on guidance received from DHEC, from CDC to determine what those things look like. We've also spoken with and are in direct contact with industry leaders in those particular areas. Who best to know about the best practices in those areas than those folks who are actually in that industry. So we are combining the guidance that we receive obviously from our public health areas, DHEC, CDC, and working with industry leaders to figure out what would best help them in reopening. Barber and cosmetology obviously is not the only one that we're looking at and working on. But we will also have what we consider compliance assistance in addition to those additional fact sheets. You get the fact sheets, you're looking at it, okay, I think somebody asked the question, how does this apply to me? We will have folks on staff who will be able to answer questions. We'll have access virtually to be able to maybe look through facilities, provide training. Training is going to be crucial during this period of time as we reopen. It's great to have a policy, it's great to have guidelines, but if nobody knows what they are, we're kind of a shot in the dark. So we are a huge proponent of training and are willing to assist in that avenue as well. I didn't know if you had any specific questions in that regard.
Well, believe it or not, I do. So as you look at some of those industries, those close contact industries, what are some things you're thinking about? I mean, is it PPE? I mean, are we thinking like, hey, James Burns goes in to wants to get a haircut. Does he make an appointment with the barber and then he goes in one at a time, or are social distance? Does he or she who's cutting my hair wear gloves? Do I wear? What are some of the things that you're thinking about that you as you are considering these issues?
Yes, great question. So we're looking at several things, including obviously the aspect of social distancing. We know that the more people in an area, the increase of potential exposure. So limiting waiting rooms, lobbies, things of that nature, having appointments, virtual setup for appointments, things of that nature, the ability to receive, take money, in addition to continued use of PPE, hand washing. So PPE might include everything from a mask to gloves, the use of hand sanitizer, once again, frequent hand washing. But the idea really is knowing that it is a close contact service industry to make sure that we limit, it's really going to be limiting the exposure of multiple customers and not necessarily the customer and the person providing the service. There's only so many ways I can cut your hair without not being close to you. There's no way to cut your hair within 6 feet, or less than, excuse me, within that 6 feet, right? So looking at the other ways to be able to deal with that. I think that's the reality of where we are, and as we've mentioned to industry leaders, if and when you guys do reopen, we have to look at those things specifically.
Well, I'll say this, you give me a few more days, you'll be able to cut my hair 6 feet away. I got more goo and hairspray. I guess my question is, these are the barbershops, beauty parlors, those kind of things. Those are typically small businesses that can't last very much longer, because they've been underwater now for a good bit of time. So I would urge us all to let's get those things as quickly as we can, because we want to move as quickly as we can, as safely as we can, but as quickly as we can. So let's hurry.
And so if I could make one comment, Jennifer, and then again, this term that I think that we continue to use, and I think is important, is the best practices, the safety protocols. I mean, that's really I think that type of guidance is what we're looking at. And
yeah, James, the biggest question we get is about taking temperatures. So people say, I have a manufacturing facility, should I check everybody when they come in the door? At the grocery store, I've had people say we need to be taking, so, and then you hear people say, once you got a fever, it's too late, right? So you're really not doing anything other than making people feel better that you took their temperature. So that's the sort of guidance that our HR professionals are seeking, is, kind of those best practices that they can hang their hat on and tell employees who don't want to have their temperature taken that, no, this is a guideline, and we're going to follow the guidelines, because I can guarantee you they will do one thing beyond what's recommended to try to keep their employees and their customers safe.
That's good to know.
I wonder a couple of things. The model that PRT and Restaurant and Lodging used, they created it, brought it to the regulators. I'm wondering if we couldn't use that model jumping off of this group to be able to get more done quickly, because I got to believe your staff has to be just absolutely stretched, completely thin right now. Right. So I think that's one of the things that we would like to offer is, if we can help you with certain ones, I'm happy to talk with you about those. I mean, I mentioned earlier we've got, I think, I'm including you and DHEC, but we've got 12 state agencies here. So I feel like, or represented, so I feel like we could help you. And then you've got all these fantastic partners around the table. So I think, the question about, barbershops and salons is a matter of, if we've got some guidelines that we all can agree to, I think then, you've got an answer about when.
And Governor, I think we could do that really quickly, too.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Let's do it.
We've decided early on to do the temperature checks, because my thoughts were, we're self-insured, we're paying for people's coverage anyway. Let's find out if they have any kind of illness, and let's make sure they get home and get well so that we can keep the rest of the folks safe. What I can tell you is we're doing it with the handheld electronic readers, but I've already purchased. There's a walk-through system. There's also a room-wide system that you can get on your screen and see 98, 101, whatever. And so you can actually do it without people realizing that they're necessarily doing that. And some of these are only around $8,000. So we've decided to add the walk-through type as we come in each employee entrance. I've got those on order, and they're less than $10,000 each. And I thought, this is a great practice forever to keep people well. And so we're doing that. And some of you know this, but last week we purchased the equipment to be able to do large-scale testing with results within hours. And so we should have that program up and running in 2 weeks. We will offer that to any employer, any association, anybody that wants it, so we can help the hospitals and DHEC and others take pressure off of their testing services. So we're planning on doing that, and we want to make that available. We may come to your business, come to your parking lot, and do those outside, even walk-by tests. And we're working real quickly to try and get that implemented, and we'll be able to do both the sequence testing as well as the serology testing to give us Are you over it? Do you have the antibodies? Could you go and donate to the hospitals? So we're working right now to get that done, and I want to make those services available to all South Carolinians, so it'll help us have confidence to get back to work.
How many employees do you have, Lou, now?
2,000. We've got 2,000. And what my thoughts were, if we started on our street, we are next door neighbors to Amazon, which they're all working. We have Dominion on our street, CMC Steel. There's probably 10,000 employees. That'll knock out a big chunk, and we can get those results back in about 2-3 days to do the testing and get the lab results. So I want to keep that around, and I want to do it every time we have flu A, flu B, H1N1. We're going to do it from here on out. We set ourselves up as a CLIA site, and I think it would be, good for other businesses that, like lucky for us, we have chemistry labs and micro labs and a lot of analysts with experience, so it's a little easier for us to do. But with so many employees, I think it's the right thing. And I want to, offer those services to anybody in South Carolina.
Well, there are a lot of small businesses that probably cannot afford a $10,000 machine to test their
Well, I'm going to tell you,
employees.
we're in over $500,000 already. So they're not cheap. They are not. There's some smaller testing that gets slow results, but I felt like the biggest way to make a dent was to get the larger scale. So the sequence tester, just without the supplies, is right at $200,000. But we've decided it was the right thing to do. And we hope to help y'all with that.
So
Excellent.
we followed the same course with remote temperature testing of employees and the walkthroughs. We've got some on order. They're coming in from Europe. That you're right about the price tag, but that's where regulatory relief, liability relief really comes in handy, because when we first looked into temperature testing, it was an ADA violation. And in these circumstances, we said, the heck with that, we're going to do it anyway, because our employees will understand exactly why you're sending somebody away. But I think that's important from a liability standpoint.
And following up on exactly what he just said, it reminds me of what Ted said initially. A lot of these small businesses are going to have civil liability concerns. That mean, if somebody contracts the virus, they have exposure. So it seems to me that one of the ways to address that would be, for each of these industry groups, have a set of best practices and protocols that if those protocols and best practices are discharged, that there is a safe harbor within which that small business can operate. So, and it may be that it has to be for just a certain period of time, because the trial bar is going to go crazy if you have it for permanent. But if you have it in and sunset within 6 to 9 months or something of that nature, it removes that particular legal impediment. Because if I'm a small business and if my business involves being in close proximity to people, that's an X factor that's going to prevent me from really jumping in the way you want them to jump in. So that's, I'm just thinking out loud about how to remove that particular obstacle that you mentioned and that Ted mentioned.
Right. But even from the standpoint of the governor's question earlier, if you're going to send somebody away and not let them into your small business, eventually you're going to get a lawsuit. Yeah. So there has to be some understanding that, no, these guidelines are in place for everybody, and you can be excluded from service on this day because you're just sneezing your head off when you come to the door.
Well, look, I mean, I'm not a trial lawyer, and I won't delve into. I mean, if somebody wants to file a lawsuit, they file a lawsuit. I mean, I think we've seen that. But nevertheless, Tom, or Senator Davis, I mean, no doubt that liability reform is critical. Jennifer, I'm going to ask for a point of personal privilege, actually. If we could take a brief break here for about 3 minutes.
Well, I was going to do one thing before we took a break.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Yeah, of course.
What I wanted to do is close out this topic and then take a break, and then we'll come back and discuss access to PPE. Because I think on this topic, where we were going is we were saying, okay, we probably need these best practices and guidelines for a series of situations. We've got restaurants, we've got golf courses. Obviously, there's a huge need for the salons, barbershops, et cetera, and we pledged to work on that. I think maybe the next thing, Dwayne, I know you already started to work on hotels, but hotels and then short-term rentals. If you could just comment on that real quick, and if we can help you with that.
Sure. Yeah. The association, John and his group have started that on the hotel side. As I mentioned earlier, fitness centers, spas, swimming pools. What do those look like in the new plan? Short-term rentals. A lot of those are whole house versus a hotel. different product, if you will, from hotels. So working on those as well. And that gives us sort of, from our industry perspective in tourism, that gives us hotels or accommodations, if you will, restaurants and golf courses. I think attractions, from amusements to Carowinds, those are sort of next. They're working on that now. I mean, you know, they want to get open as soon as possible too, but they've got to work on another plan, on a plan as well. But that's sort of the model we're following to how to accomplish what this group is talking about.
So I guess, James, from y'all's perspective, are there other hot segments that we need to look at these protocols for very quickly?
So I think what a lot of what we're hearing is that was the question of Christina about like the barbershops and the close contact businesses, nail salons, again, because they're kind of a big crux of our small businesses, and so again, it's one of those things also that helps to give people the confidence to be able to move forward in a way that they feel that they can do so safely, and they can do so in a way that, hey, you know, we can do these things safely. We can follow these best practices and safety protocols, and you know what works for this business industry to do it. So those are all wonderful suggestions.
I have a question. We have an order based on a CDC designation of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut for domestic travel advisories. That is, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta said that asked people from those states not to go anywhere. I think that advisory has been lifted. Based on that advisory, we issued an order requiring people from those designated hotspots coming to the state to self-quarantine for 2 weeks. That's still in effect today. We also required the no taking of reservations for some period of time in the hotel and bed and breakfast and everything else from people from those locations. Is it time for those orders to expire? I see Helen Hill shaking her head vigorously. Yes.
I would probably defer more to the CDC or someone from the national perspective in regard to the tri-state area up there. I will tell you, I don't know that I'm in a position to give you an answer on that, Governor.
One thing that's really important to remember that for us is I wish that we had that spigot that we could turn on and off for visitors. I really do. Dwayne and I both do.
Sure.
But back to the reservations, just because they make the reservation today does not mean they're checking in today. So
That's right.
It's really critical that we start the process of accepting reservations so that people can come and enjoy the summer in our beautiful state.
Yeah, Helen brought up a good key. When is that hotels can start taking reservations for those states? You know, obviously, you'd like to think that July, August, September, and forward, you'd be okay taking reservations from those. As far as the actual date, I'm not sure.
Okay, I want to remind everyone we did not close any of those things.
Right.
We just limited that.
Right.
With special deference as everything we've taken, Tom Davis, to the Constitution of the United States, which is made for difficult times, not just good times.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to say something before we take the break that you wanted to do.
Yes, sir, Mr. Swink.
Thank you for having me here, Lieutenant Governor and Governor. And we spent a lot of time on guidelines, and guidelines are critical, and they're mandatory. You must have them. But I don't think, putting enough emphasis on the business people that run a small business or a large business. We've heard from 3 people, Lou and John and Mobby, on how they run their business, and Greg, how personally they take in managing their business properly without guidelines. And these small businesses are just as capable as Lou is, I am, or Greg is, or anybody else in this room, in making their company run safely and efficiently. And we don't need to underestimate a small business. That's what built this country, and that is what's going to make us come out of this trap that we're in. I have an old saying, and where I'm from, a little country place that I'm from, is no longer now does a small business want the cheese. He just wants out the trap. And right now, we need to get out of this trap, and we've got to spend more, have more confidence in the ability of a small business person in being able to deal with this. And I think we're underestimating that. Again, I realize we have to have guidelines, but you probably can get a lot better guidelines from these people running their businesses that have been running them for years and for a lifetime, and it's beginning to slip away from them. They don't want that, and these type people are hurting real bad, and we need to be sure we got enough, put some confidence in the person who's running a small business. If nothing else, we learned out of New York is that how horrible this disease really is. Had New York not surfaced to the extent that they were, we'd not had any worse problems here in South Carolina and New York. We probably wouldn't be treating this thing quite as aggressive as we are. But we are where we are, and I would encourage the leadership to give a little more credit to management of companies. And you've heard some on a big scale, but there are many, many more on a small scale that can do it just as good.
I think evidence thank you for that. I think evidence of that is the fact that the fewer restrictions that we have placed have worked better than the horrendous restrictions that other states have imposed, and that's because of what you just said.
All right, on that note, we'll take a 3-minute break, and then we'll get back so we can get through. And just so everybody knows, towards the end of our session here, Senators Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott are going to be joining us, and we'll hear a few words from them, and then after our discussion, then we'll be done. Thanks.